Welcome to the California Sun Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Schechtman. In the complex tapestry of urban life, few issues are as visible, as contentious, and as heartbreaking as homelessness. For decades, cities have grappled with this challenge, often responding with sweeps of encampments as a temporary fix. But now we've reached a critical mass, a tipping point that was long in the making. The problem has been growing steadily, even before the pandemic, and has since exploded to unprecedented levels. Public frustration is mounting, and the inevitability of action has become clear. Into this powder keg of tension, a seismic shift has occurred. The recent Supreme Court decision in the Grants Pass case has suddenly reshaped the landscape, giving cities newfound latitude in addressing homeless encampments. Governor Newsom's executive order to clear encampments has ratcheted up the hot summer temperatures still further. From San Francisco to Sacramento, we're witnessing a surge of aggressive action, with sweeps becoming more frequent and more contentious. Yet as some cities flex their newfound muscle, others are charting a different course, seeking innovative solutions to this enduring crisis. All of this is unfolding against the backdrop of looming municipal, state, and national elections just 3 months away. The result is a dramatic reshuffling of the deck on homelessness policy, with political positions evolving as rapidly as the situation on the ground. To help us navigate this shifting terrain, I am joined today by Kevin Fagan. As the San Francisco Chronicle's lead reporter on homelessness, Kevin has been on the front lines of this issue for many years. His insightful reporting has not just chronicled the crisis, but has helped shape our understanding of it. Kevin is a longtime award-winning reporter at the Chronicle, specializing in homelessness, enterprise news feature writing, breaking news, and crime. His career has taken him to extraordinary places and situations. He's witnessed 7 prison executions and written extensively about serial killers. Kevin's reporting has covered disasters ranging from 9/11 to California's devastating wildfires. Yet throughout his career, homelessness has remained a focus for Kevin, close to his heart as a journalist who cares passionately about the human condition. His depth of experience and compassionate approach bring a unique perspective to this pressing issue. It is my pleasure to welcome Kevin Fagan here to the California Sun Podcast. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, it is a delight to have you here. How long have you been covering this issue of homelessness? Talk about that.
Well, it depends on where you clock. I guess I got my first journalism job that was steady and paid in 1980. So you can date it from then. The first homeless sweep I covered was in 1981, out in the valley near Lodi, and I've made it a central focus throughout my career. I've done lots of things, as you mentioned in that little bio, and we now have several reporters at the Chronicle who also cover homelessness, including a wonderful beat reporter named Maggie Angst, stationed in City Hall. But I kind of do macro looks at all kinds of issues, and homelessness, as you said, is a core focus of what I do. I have a book coming out next February, as a matter of fact, on homelessness. So long time, and it does feel a bit like a rinse and repeat cycle. Sweeps really haven't changed that much in the more than 40 years that I've been covering it. The policies to help homeless people have changed, which is good. Leaning in on supportive housing and street outreach and rehab. But the trouble back then, as now, is always that there are not enough resources devoted to addressing this. And so it just becomes this problem that people get pissed off. That's come in various waves.
Talk a little bit about the influence and the impact of drugs and how that's changed life on the streets.
Fentanyl has worsened it, because fentanyl is more easily addictive and kills people quicker than any of the other awful drugs that we've seen. I mean, back in the 80s, crack was the scourge of the devil. It was putting people into the street and ruining lives for housed and unhoused people. Then it was a resurgence of heroin. Then it was methamphetamine. Oh, my God, this is going to kill everyone. Then it was heroin again. And now it's fentanyl and meth. Meth doesn't get as much attention, but these drugs are all terrible. And when they get their talons into you, you wind up losing everything after you burn through all your family and rehab resources and everything else that could be available, and you wind up in the street. One thing to remember is the people you see shooting up and sleeping in tents and, folding over double from the fentanyl folds, as they call it, the nods. That's those folks are part of the chronically homeless population, which is only usually around 30%, maybe 40, depending on the city. The rest of the homeless folks are in shelters, couch surfing, in vehicles, that kind of thing. So it's a subset, but it's a really troubled subset. These are the folks who've been on the street for more than a year, have more than a majority, and more than a majority have troubles with mental illness and or drugs, and they're trapped. These folks are not going to just voluntarily waltz off the street by themselves. They need a lot of help.
In the years that you've been covering it, is there a change in who the homeless are? Who is it that winds up homeless? Has any of that changed?
Not really. In the 80s, there was an explosion called the Big Bubble or the Big Bump in some quarters when social programs, HUD in particular, that helped keep lower income people housed and supported with some kind of income supplement, got decimated. The Reagan Revolution gave us that. And the Reagan Revolution then evolved into holding down minimum wage. We've had resistance to national health, which every other country, like us has, and housing help. So those three things have combined to create what's about a third of the population that's either impoverished or damn close to it. So when you have that, you have a pump that constantly feeds the homeless population. And that was true in the 80s as it settled in, and it's true today. You don't see a whole lot of stockbrokers and engineers and even journalists winding up chronically homeless in the street. They do seem to be exceptions. What you have is people who were hanging on by their fingernails and fell down to the streets. And by now, after 40 odd years, it's kind of generational. I've met a lot of people whose parents were homeless and now they're homeless.
Talk a little bit about what you've seen as the biggest mistake that governments, that public policy makes over and over again that hasn't really helped the situation, and yet the mistakes keep happening.
Not staffing up supportive housing with enough caseworkers who are super qualified, because the main fix that I've seen has been supportive housing, which is subsidized apartments, rooms where you can move people into off the streets and then surround them with services. Because, like I said, these are really troubled people when they come in inside, and they need help. They need help with the trauma that they experienced living on the streets. So you need therapy. You need help getting off drugs. You need help figuring out how to re-enter a job market or join a job market if you never were in it. These are folks who aren't just going to, pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And I've seen over and over and over that once they get inside, they just kind of spin in place. And that's a problem. In San Francisco in particular, LA, Denver, New York, I've seen it everywhere. You have people who live inside, but during the daytime, they'll go back outside to score drugs, to hang out with the people they used to have as community on the street, sit on milk carts or hang out in the tents. Essentially look homeless. And then at night, they go back inside to sleep. And sometimes they'll sleep outside too. But they need help changing their lifestyle. They need help reorienting toward a more successful trajectory in their lives. And not giving that the way it should be is one of the main issues that I see. Because if you could fix people, so to speak, once they moved inside into supportive housing, then they can move on to independent lives and make room in the supportive housing for more people. So you don't have to build more supportive housing. What we often do with supportive housing and shelter is create de facto housing projects. These are supposed to be ideally temporary things. I mean, if you move into supportive housing in a lot of cities like San Francisco, they say, okay, it's yours for life. And that's true. But what you really want is someone to get their stuff together so they can move out alone. And that's actually, we've made some stabs at that over the years. There was a program called Moving On that was really, I thought, was pretty wonderful. It started in New York, and we brought it out into San Francisco, and then the funding and the housing availability through the housing projects in San Francisco got diverted, dried up. They didn't do it as much. They're starting to do some of it today, but they should really ramp that up. But again, one of the troubles with this whole issue is you're kind of digging out in reverse with the kind of poverty and the lack of the ability to move up in your lives with shitty minimum wage, housing being too expensive. You just get too many people coming into the system. It shouldn't be like that. You're backfilling. It's a trend, and then people complain and blame the cities, the mayors usually, and the governors. How come you're not fixing this? Well, it's a national problem that begins before it gets to the governors and the mayors and the local street outreach guys.
How much worse did the pandemic make it?
That's really hard to tell. I haven't seen any meaningful analysis of exactly how that affected things. During the pandemic, I and a whole ton of others wrote about how it was actually pretty good for housing. A lot of homeless folks got put into shelters in hotels, which was pretty good upgrade from the street. The trouble again was not enough intensive counseling and case managers, so some of those hotels got trashed pretty bad, and the owners were pretty pissed off. But at the same time, in California, we created something called the Home Key. It was Governor Newsom's idea, where they would convert hotels into supportive housing or permanent housing, which was a great idea because the buildings are already there. All you got to do is fix them up, a lot cheaper than building from the bricks up. And that was actually a really good outcome of the pandemic. It was one of the few favors that god awful disease gave us. So I don't think there were massive amounts of people who became homeless because of the pandemic. The fixes kind of helped, but it was a crappy situation all around. And one of the bad effects of the pandemic was that at first a lot of cities said, well, we can't move people inside, we can't mess with them because this disease spreads instantly. So it's actually safer to leave people outside where they are. So they did, and the streets. There was none of the usual stirring of the populations, moving them around, trying to house them, that kind of thing. So the streets looked pretty awful for quite a while until people felt confident enough to do things like Room Key, which was the shelter in the hotels program, and to actually address it with moving people inside. But were there more people because of the pandemic? I don't really think so.
And one of the things that we're seeing now, which you've written about, is people, the public in general, being more angry about it, being more frustrated about it, creating more and more pressure on electeds and on city government.
Yeah. I think it's probably about a third wave, I think, of compassion fatigue. There was this, paroxysm of efforts in the 80s to figure out how to help the population, and it kept growing. The street population. And so in the early 90s, there was a lot of us wrote about compassion fatigue. And then there was an effort to, okay, let's try to house people more aggressively and do some more rehab. And that ramped up. And then in the late 90s, early 2000s, compassion fatigue again. Because what happens is there's great enthusiasm for doing the right thing and for helping and fixing the problem. And then when the public sees it doesn't work, they still got guys camped outside their house, or clogging the line on the sidewalk trying to get into a store. People get fed up, and then they get pissed off, and you hit the screw it button. And now we're in another period of compassion fatigue, because there's been a lot of effort to try to address this, and it doesn't make the problem go away. So we're now in the go away stage, where especially with the Supreme Court ruling making it easier to do sweeps, which is where you go into a camp and you clear it out, and you tell them to move. And tell them either go into shelter or move. And so that's where we're at, and I think we're going to be that for a while.
And the people that are being swept up, where are they going? Where are they being put at this point? And weren't those places available before the sweeps?
Well, they were. One of the troubles is persuading people to go inside, because you really can't force people to take shelter. You can jail them. There's a whole range of offenses you could use if you went to the nth degree. But I think the statistic is anywhere from half to 80%, depending on where you're at, of people who refuse shelter when you offer it. And until the Supreme Court ruling, you really were required to offer that before you move the camp. Now you don't really have to, but they still do, knowing that a lot of people are going to refuse it. It's going to be interesting to see going forward how this works when you offer the shelter and then you're more aggressive, because that's what's starting to happen in San Francisco. Is you say, okay, you want shelter, get out. If you say no, that's that, and it happens quicker. In fact, Maggie, the beat reporter out of City Hall, has a story going where she watched a guy getting handcuffed because he said he didn't want to go into shelter, and they cleared his stuff, and then they let him go, and they cite him. That we're going to see more citations issued. It's all designed to force people to move out of where they're at. But as always, there's not enough places really to put people. If you took all of the homeless people on the streets and put them, and tried to put them into shelter or housing, it's not really available, not quickly available. I mean, San Francisco has done, under London Breed, actually, the current mayor, has created a lot of new shelters and a lot of new housing, but it's never enough to get ahead of the tide. So when you move people, essentially you're going to move them a few blocks away, further away from the district that they're sleeping in right now. It's ping ponging. It's what they called it for, what they have called it for many years. God, I first heard ping ponging in 2003 when I spent 6 months on the streets for a series that I did, and that's really what happens with sweeps.
Is there any difference in the way these sweeps take place? Is Oakland doing it the same as San Francisco, or the same as other cities? Are there variations, and are there variations that are better?
I don't know what better would be. It's interesting that, like you said, the public demands is in a period of demanding action. They essentially just want the problem out of sight. And Oakland, I covered the first big sweep around here of note since the Supreme Court ruling, and that was just about a week ago in Oakland. And they did give people quite a lot of notice, give them 3 days to get out. They gave them warning of several days. The argument in return, there's always going to be pushback on this. And unlike in the 80s, the homeless people do have some well-organized advocates. And so there's been a court action in the Oakland sweep that led up to the one a week ago that said, well, a lot of these folks have disabilities. I mean, there were military vets with PTSD, guy with AIDS, people dealing with dementia. And so under the Disability Act, Americans with Disability Act, you can't move these people unless you give them disability appropriate places to move into. Well, some of the folks took the offers of shelter with the idea and the promise that, yeah, we'll try to get you something more appropriate down the line. But about half of the folks just moved to another part of town.
A lot of this is certainly happening, as you've referred to a couple of times, the recent Supreme Court decision. How much is the fact that we are in an election season driving this action? And will it be different after November 5th?
I don't have a crystal ball, but I do think that the election season probably does affect it. You want to look like you're taking action. You want to look like you're responding to the public's complaints, and the doing the most, what's the word, but the most compassionate, long-lasting fixes take a while. Just persuading a chronically homeless person on the street to come in and help, come in and take the help that we offer, that often takes about 2 years, according to the outreach counselors I've hung with and my own experience of covering homeless people over the years. It could take that long. The public doesn't have that kind of patience right now. I mean, like you said, it's election season. They want action. And if they don't get action, they're going to pick someone else in charge, from the presidential election on down to the local boards. And so if you're not going to wait 2 years for people to take the help, what are you going to do? You're going to go in and sweep them and try to force people into the shelter and the housing that you do have. And if they don't take it, you're going to move them on so that the residents and businesses who are complaining can say, oh, good, now they're not on my sidewalk anymore.
Talk a little bit about leadership. Certainly, we have a lot of electeds talking about it, and we have a huge amount of groups that are offering services or trying to do something, nonprofits after nonprofits after nonprofits. What do you see in that regard?
It's always the question that time and again, God, I've seen, I can't count how many waves of opinion saying, oh, it's Homeless Incorporated. It's the homeless industrial complex. All these nonprofits just want to perpetuate the problem so they have jobs. I really don't buy into that, because when I've had to look heavy into nonprofits that are working on the homeless problem, I find that most of the people in those jobs are underpaid, and they're burnout jobs that usually last a couple of years before you got to try something else. And the people in government, they don't want this problem to continue. Who the hell would? It's not good PR. So it's a giant structure that's really, once you get something that big, it's hard to get your hands on it. There are always scandals of people misspending money, robbing the till to pay for their own lifestyles. Those scandals get a lot of ink, but what I think is mostly the case is these nonprofits are just grinding along, trying to do the right thing, and dealing with a problem that just never goes away.
And talk about you and how covering this for so many years and seeing what I think it's fair to say most of us find to be a really depressing situation. How has that impacted you in watching this and covering it for so many years, Kevin?
Well, it's worn on me. Yeah, yeah. I've written so many obits on people who were in the streets that I cared deeply about, and they died anyway, despite help. Sometimes they'll finally move inside, and what often happens is once you move inside, if you've been chronic outside for a long time, you'll die within a year, because all the defensive mechanisms in your body that were warding off diseases and whatnot, you relax and they come and bite you. It breaks my heart. The book that I wrote is about two people that I helped get off the street through my reporting. I wrote stories, and their families got a hold of me, and their families came out and got these folks and took them home. And one of them, Rita Grant, blossomed beautifully. She became the person she was meant to be. when she was living in a colony in downtown San Francisco called Homeless Island. And when I wrote about her, her family said, "Oh my God, we got to come do something," because I painted how desperate that little colony was. Took her home to Florida, and she did wonderfully. And she just died of cancer last year, which was really heartbreaking for, of course, her family and for me. But she got a good 20 or so years of life, and that made me feel really good. The other person in my book, which is called The Lost and the Found, and you'll tell why when I tell you this, but Tyson Filzer, super smart guy, great guy. Met him when I was doing a story. His family flew out from Ohio, said, "Help me find my brother." His brother did. He has a great brother named Barron. And we walked around all day and did find Tyson in the streets. And Barron took him home to Ohio. He went into rehab. He got cleaned up. He was doing great. And then he had a bipolar condition that no one knew he was self-medicating with. Even he didn't know it. So once he got off the drugs, it came up and bit him, and he came back and died at the same block we found him at. That kind of that kind of death happens over and over and over and over, and it breaks your fucking heart.
And do you ever think about that you don't want to cover this anymore? That, maybe there's another beat that you want to switch to?
I have diminished my involvement in all this at some point. In fact, I still write about homelessness, but we've got people at the paper who write more frequently about it than me. All the ins and outs, the fist fights at City Hall, the policy changes. I've had people in that beat over the years who also write about homelessness, who when they leave the paper, they say, "I don't know how the hell you did this all this time," because it usually fries your circuits after a few years. And so what I did is, I did a time where I concentrated on the American West. So I traveled all over the West doing stories that, about tiny towns, and it was fascinating. It was wonderful. But there's always, homelessness is always on my plate. You gotta vary the diet. If I did nothing but homelessness for 40 years, I would be a different person. I couldn't do nothing but. It's traumatic. I have a version of PTSD, I've been told, from hanging out this long with this population, because they're in such horrible need, such dysfunction, such pain and tragedy, and the moments of triumph and redemption, they're terrific. They just don't happen often enough. What I more often see is really wonderful efforts by people who try to help homeless people. That's why I like writing a happy story probably more than most reporters, because it lifts my spirits, and I think it lifts hopes and spirits of people who read it. But more often than not, you're writing stories about things are screwed up and people are in desperate need, just over and over and over and over. At this point, I take comfort, I think, in talking to street people. It's become a thing I do love to do, when I can go out and sit with chronically homeless folks and talk to them, because I try to see where their lives could improve. And I'm, at this point at my age and this point in my career, I'm not afraid to say, "Look, buddy, why don't you just go into rehab? I see you sliding that needle in your arm. I see you, smoking up that fentanyl load. This is fucking your life." And they do. No homeless person I've ever met really wants to be homeless. They don't really want to be addicted to drugs. And I feel that I can say to them, I'm not proselytizing and telling them, "Hey, look, clean up or else." I'm saying there's a better way in your life, and talk to me about that. Talk to me about why you're not doing that and what stops you from doing that. How you got here. I do find it somewhat cathartic. I don't know if that's the right word, it's just good for me to go out and have those conversations.
The good news for you, though, is that a lot of the work that you do, a lot of the writing that you've done, has had a real impact on people.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, some of the stuff that I've written over the years has actually changed national and local policy. I mean, there was a program called Homeward Bound that Gavin Newsom created after he read about my stories in 2005, I believe it was, 4 and 5, about Rita being rescued off Homeless Island. He said, Jesus, we should, maybe other people can be helped like that by their families. So he created a program called Homeward Bound that has sent 15,000 people home, and about half of them, fail and come back. But that's still like 8,000 people that did better in their lives. So that makes me feel good when things happen. And supportive housing ramped up partly because of the reporting that I did. And so, you got to take the inspiration where you can, but it just wears you out.
Kevin Fagan, I thank you so much for spending time with us here on the California Sun podcast.
Hey, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And thank you for listening and joining us here on the California Sun podcast. I hope you'll join us next week. I'm Jeff Sheckman. If you like this podcast, please feel free to share and help others find it by rating and reviewing it on iTunes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.